Let's gather some battlefield data on which units are best placed to implement the Omnissiah's will, with a look at 5 strong army lists for the Adeptus Mechanicus in 10th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking admech, and in this video I thought it would be interesting to see how the Scions of the Machine God have been putting the new toys from their codex onto the table, with a look at their best performing tournament lists so far. In the video we'll talk about their army briefly, and then go over 5 strong army lists and focus on a few of the units from each that seem to be strong on the tabletop. At time of recording it really hasn't been too long since admech had their codex out. They've only really had 2 big weeks worth of tournament data given that we had the Christmas lull period, and at first impressions they don't seem to be doing too terribly despite a whole bunch of doom and gloom on codex release. Given their very low player rate, I think it'd probably make sense to take a few more weeks before we talk about win percentages and things like that. And for this one I thought we'd just look at a few strong army lists, where it seems that Adeptus Mechanicus armies really are performing quite well in tournaments. A fair few big events where they say went 4-1, either 4 wins and 1 loss or 4 wins and a draw, and actually seem to be doing kind of fine in the grand tournament scene at least, for an army that's played quite so infrequently. For detachments being used, it looks like maybe the Hunter Cohort has had the most success. Out of the list that went at least 4 wins over the last few weeks, it looks like Skitarii Hunter Cohort were 3 of those, the other 2 were Radzone Core and Datasarm Conclave. It certainly seemed like the formation with some of the most powerful options out of them, though maybe a little bit limited and focused on the Skitarii infantry. So far out of the units of the codex, people seem to be building really quite heavily around Vanguard, being in just about every list, often with some Rangers as support for some scout moves, maybe Marshals to support them in Hunter Cohort, perhaps Techno-Archaeologists if not. As suspected, Kataphron Breachers do tend to be the core damage dealer unit for the codex, kind of as expected really given the points cost, and they tend to be backed up by the Dominus or the Manipulous Tech Priests. Pteraxii are very popular, particularly the Sterilizers in Skitarii Hunter Cohort. Infiltrators and Cerberus Raiders, usually taken in small numbers to contest the mid-board as before, and it seems that at least for these first performing lists, Iron Striders and Dragoons do seem to get played, but despite being absolutely dirt cheap for the fast moving wounds and damage output that's at least a little bit interesting, they don't seem to be spammed quite as much as I might have thought they might have been. I guess that's perhaps partly due to the impracticalities of getting the models together. But in all of these lists so far at least, they do seem to be taking in a slightly more supporting role, and not just flooding the board with absolutely loads of them just for board control. Otherwise, for things not being taken quite so much, the Fulgurite Electro Priests, Castellan Robots, Sulphur Hounds, Kataphron Destroyers, Rust Stalkers and Archaeopters, none of those appeared in any of these top 5 lists so far. Though I feel like out of that selection, some of them are a bit more or less usable. Can't help but think that Fulgurites could be interesting in Datasarm if you're committed to melee mode. Getting into the army list though, and this first one is a Hunter Cohort won by Kyle Jackling, who used it to go 4 wins and 1 draw at Grimdark New Year GT according to Best Coast pairings. Compared with the others, this one seems to be really quite a character-heavy Hunter Cohort. It's headed up by no less than 3 Skitarii Marshals, presumably joining the Vanguard or Rangers. They've got Clandestine Hunter to allow Infiltrators and Scouts for 1 Vanguard unit, Veiled Hunter for a pretty excellent redeploy 3 Skitarii infantry units after you know who's going first, or put them into strategic reserve, and Battlesphere Uplink for move shoot move 6 inches mechanic for some very fast moving Vanguard moving into the midfield, and maybe doing a little bit of jump shoot jumping around objectives. The Marshals make their damage output kind of okay as well, giving you rerolls to hit. Then there's 2 big units of Kataphron Breachers with heavy arc rifles and hydraulic claw. Big hitting damage 3 weaponry, as ever hard to go too far wrong with, 4 rerolls to hit from nearby Skitarii, and it looks like for these one of them's headed up by Tech Priest Dominus for the Feel No Pain, and one of Manipulous for the lethal hits. A big investment unit for this army is there's 3 enormous units of 10 Pteraxii Sterilizers, the guys with the Phosphor Torch flamethrowers, and I guess they're particularly good for the Stratagems as we'll get onto in a second. There's also 2 units of their counterpart Pteraxii Skystalkers, and a unit of Sicarian Infiltrators and 1 of Cerberus Raiders to hold the midfield, and 1 single Lonely Sidonian Dragoon with a Radium Jezzail at just 45 points for a cheap nuisance unit. I guess that's fairly hoardy Skitarii as it goes here. Around about 100 models on the board, and lots of small cheap Skitarii units that can use the powerful stratagems for the Hunter Cohort. Definitely with all those fast moving things, Infiltrators, Deep Strikers and Scout units, it looks like a list that'll score secondaries really quite well. And there's even a pair of Techno-Archaeologists as well to be able to deny deep strike to some objectives. The Pteraxii sterilizers do seem to be used en masse in a couple of these Hunter cohort lists. 65 points for 5 of them, and fairly tough as they go, I suppose. 2 wounds at a 4+ save and a 5+ invulnerable isn't too bad for jump infantry. They hit with flamethrowers, which could potentially threaten some really quite big Overwatch. They reroll wound rolls of 1 against enemies on objectives, and if they can coordinate with some Skitarii battle line, that could go up to 4 wound rerolls. Seems pretty great skirmishers, can pretty much delete anything that's light and potentially do that in the enemy turn with Overwatch. Quite nice for a fast moving unit that will threaten objectives, okay. Otherwise, their partners in crime, the Skystalkers, also seem to get played a bit, just 2 units of 5 in this last list. They get a bunch of anti-infantry shots with their flechette blasters, but I feel like the main draw is their big move shoot move thing that they can do. These guys could move ridiculously fast, maybe up to 24 inches per turn if you're in the Conqueror imperative. Could be good nuisance units to move block enemies or screen certain areas, or just zip around doing secondaries really easily. All of these guys can make some pretty good use of the Skitarii Hunter cohort stratagems. I feel like these are maybe some of the biggest draws to the detachment. There's one where the Skitarii infantry can't be shot at greater than 12 inches away when they're targeted. That's just massive for guaranteeing an objective or guaranteeing one unit can survive a turn. You can put units back in reserve, which is pretty big for the flamethrower Pteraxii jumping on and off the board. There's a nice reactive 5+ feel no pain one, and a few fun damage boosts such as extra AP +1 to wound and an advance and charge one. Overall, they're all pretty great stratagems, and those Pteraxii do seem to be particularly vicious to use them on. Next up, and looking at a different formation, we've got a Datasarm Conclave one. This one was run by Ethan Pettibone, who used it to take 4 wins at the Warhammer GT in January. The Datasarm one is the one where you get to choose one of 2 buffs at the start of the game, either extra AP by -1 if you're within half range, or +1 strength and attack on the charge. These boosts only apply to Cult Mechanicus units, so for this list it would just be those 3 enormous units of Kataphron breaches. It does kind of feel like the detachment that you take if you really want to spam these to the max. Those breaches look like they're being led by 2 Dominus Tech Priests and 1 Manipulus, and they're taking the enhancements from the Datasarm Conclave. The Auto Sermon allows the other benediction of the Omnisire once per game, so you could have a big hitting countercharge unit perhaps, and the Temper Copier gives the unit fights first, so they'd be a pretty intimidating prospect to charge. Otherwise, again, there's 1 unit of 10 Rangers and 3 units of 10 Vanguard. In general, the Vanguard tend to get taken far more than Rangers, and both of those are important for giving the Kataphrons their rerolls to hit. Otherwise, in support, there's 1 unit of 5 Pteraxii Sterilizers, 3 units of Infiltrators with flechettes and tasers, 3 individual Ironstrider Ballistari with twin Cognis las cannons, nice interference units there, and 1 single Vindicare Assassin, doing lone operative annoyance things while trying to pop enemy characters. Seems that he was a bit more tempting than the Stilt Boy datasheet for this list at least. Overall does look like some pretty terrifying firepower here. Those breaches would be utterly ruinous to enemy vehicles, and plenty of units would have to be really quite brave to charge them as well, given that they can be quite tanky with those Dominus Tech Priests and then hit back very very hard, never mind the one that can fight first. Kataphron breaches do basically still seem to be the core damage dealers of the army and are present in most of these lists, 145 points for 3 of them, and for the points cost I'd argue that their defense isn't actually that great, just 3 wounds at toughness 7 and a 3+ save, but their damage is genuinely very threatening. 2 shots with the heavy arc rifle at strength 8, damage 3, and you get another 2 within 15 inches. They all have anti-vehicle 4+, and if they're within 6 inches of a battle line unit, you get to re-roll the hit roll, making the ballistic skill 4+ seem far less bad. Backing that up with a whole bunch of strength 8 and damage 3 attacks if they do get up into combat isn't the worst thing either. Both the Dominus and the Manipulus seem to be fairly viable to use them. The Dominus is more expensive and he brings a 5+ feel no pain to the unit, certainly makes them a lot tankier, and he does come with some interesting enough shooting and a little bit of combat himself, often taking the Volkite Blaster for some devastating wounds goodness. Otherwise, the Manipulus is considerably cheaper. He gives you lethal hits, which is certainly nice punching up against things, perhaps particularly against monster type units. He also has a single turn ability of a 4+ invulnerable save for the unit. That could be really quite nice against some Melter Fire or something else that's big and high AP. You can get this on the other units protected by the Dominus as well for 1 CP and Datasarm Conclave. Luminescent Blessing can give you a 4+ invulnerable for 1 CP, which is quite nice. So I guess in theory in one phase you could have 2 different Kataphron units, each with a 4+ invul. Moving on, and the next list is a Radzone core list from prior to Christmas. This one seems to have been used by Frank Kummel to go to get 4 out of 5 wins in Grimdark 18 GT. The core rule for Radzone Core has been far improved in the Codex versus the Index, given that you actually get a lot more damage with the initial bombardment, and the later test could give you the chance for a bit of battle shock to disrupt stratagems and things. Though it definitely took some big nerfs, like the fire back sort of stratagem that they had, which was really quite a huge one, and perhaps much more the Omni Sterilizer being drastically toned down compared with what it was. It still seems on paper to have a fair bit of strength though, and be fairly general purpose for the Codex. This one's interestingly taking a bunch of Corpuscarii Electro Priests. We do have 2 units of the 6 Breachers with arc rifles and hydraulic claws once more. I'd guess that one of those is with the Tech Priest Manipulus with Peerless Eradicator. Nice extra firepower there. One of them with one of those Tech Priest Dominuses. One of them takes Malphonic Sorceress and 1 Radial Suffusion. Maybe the Malphonic Sorceress one would make sense to have on the Kataphron Breacher units, giving them stealth. Radial Suffusion is the one that extends the range of your bombardment from later rounds, affecting things within 6 inches of the enemy deployment zone. Otherwise, looks like those Dominus Tech Priests are leading Corpuscarii, unless they're joining the Vanguard or something. 2 big units of 10 of them, with just the massively spammed Strength 5 attacks, both at range and in melee, and now they have the option to slow down enemy units as well, with their new and fancy Electroshock special rule. These guys and 1 unit of Vanguard look like they're fighting from the backs of some Scorpius Duneriders. Really quite efficient transports for 80 points, plenty of spammed anti-infantry firepower of themselves, and if they take aim at the same target, they can give the things that disembark from them full rerolls to wounds. That does seem pretty brutal with the sheer volume fire that the Corpuscarii could unleash. They do have a few interesting options for a bit of a damage boost as well, picking up lethal hits with lethal dosage, or potentially 4 rerolls to hit with pre-calibrated purge solution if you can target something in the enemy deployment zone. Otherwise, there's 2 units of Vanguard, 2 units of Skystalkers that look like they'd be good for secondary objective type work, 1 unit of Sterilizers, and then this list does take a fairly healthy amount of Chicken Walkers, 1 Iron Strider Ballistari with an autocannon, and then 4 individual Dragoons, 2 with Taser Lances and 2 with Radium Jezzails. Does kind of feel hard to go too far wrong with those guys. Just lots of fast moving wounds and distraction threats to tie up and annoy the enemy. Nice to see the revamped index detachment still doing some work. The Corpuscarii feel like the most interesting unit in that army list. 60 points per unit of 5 of them. They really can spam out a pretty ridiculous amount of strength 5 hits with sustained hits too. With these units, for a unit of 10 of them, you'd average 30 strength 5 AP0 hits on the enemy even without their melee. And those hits could all be re-rolling wounds thanks to the Dunerider. The -2 to move, advance and charge debuff could be kind of disruptive as well, though given that they have to get kind of close to get there might mean that it doesn't stop them from getting caught and attacked. Otherwise, for the Iron Strider style engines, the Sidonian Dragoon with the Taser Lance is pretty mighty and trusty. These things are standout durable at 60 points for 7 wounds with a 3+ save and a 5+ invulnerable, never mind the stealth that they get. They can advance and charge and put out a bunch of strength 7 and damage 2 attacks, definitely more impressive for their durability and speed compared with their damage, but they can still do something against Marines. The charge threat range of these is quite impressive if you want to tie up and annoy enemy units, and can just generally get in the way and disrupt stuff. Next up for the 4th high performing list, there's this Hunter Cohort won by Andreas Gerritschlager, 4 wins at Vienna Tabletop Championships. Kind of interestingly, this is one of the only ones that uses more ranges than Vanguard. I guess that'd give you really quite a lot of sneaky Skitarii, scouting into the midfield turn 1, and a bunch of sticky objective type rules. 2 of the Skitarii units are led by the Marshal. Clandestine Infiltrator could be quite good on the Vanguard once more. There's just the 1 unit of Kataphron Breachers here, presumably led by that Tech Priest Manipulus for the lethal hits. 1 unit of Infiltrators for the midboard control, and then another really big unit of Pteraxii Sterilizers with the Phosphor Torches, perhaps seeming like one of the best stratagem targets for this detachment given the amount of people that are running them. Then, interestingly, rather than more Kataphrons or more Sterilizers, this list is all backed up by a fair bit of actual admech vehicle support. 2 Honoured Dune Crawlers armed with Eradication Beamers. That's the Strength 9 Damage 3 one with the sustained hits. Kind of interesting that one, I've not really seen many people using that versus things like the Neutron Laser. And then 2 Scorpius Disintegrators armed with the Belarus Energy Cannon. A fair bit of admech artillery support there with strength 7 and -2 and damage 1. That's another option I haven't seen people using too much versus the Ferromite Cannon in 10th edition so far. Then there's one really quite big unit of Sidonian Dragoons with Taser Lances. The fact that they're fielded in just 1 big unit rather than 3 individual ones actually implies they probably are trying to look to do some damage here. With the attacks of 3 combined, that could be enough to fairly easily wipe out some lighter enemy infantry units. And again, that's a whole load of wounds and toughness on the table between their 7 wounds and invulnerable save and stealth and things. I guess you could even use that 1 command point bionic endurance one for a 5+ feel no pain to make the unit just ridiculously tanky. That does seem like it could be a particularly good choice on those guys. In any case, it's really quite cool to see the admech tank units being played, and particularly with these armament choices. Featuring heavily in basically all of these are the Skitarii battle line. It seems that the going way seems to be mainly Vanguard, with some units of Rangers in support. Bringing the objective scouted, objective secured sort of special rule that they have is pretty nice, plus the option to move into the midfield early. Feels like the Skitarii battle line maybe aren't in a too bad place. They do seem to be used in at least some numbers, but not generally spammed out to a maximum of 12 squads or anything like that. And their mixed special weapons can make them skirmish okay with their counterparts. Otherwise, the Vanguard are 80 points per 10, so a bit cheaper than the Rangers. They have their radium carbines with the anti-infantry spammed shots instead, and their special rule is rad saturation, meaning that you debuff enemy objective control for things within 3 inches of them, and that does make them rather good for if they can survive on objectives, as between them having objective control too and the enemy's objective control getting debuffed, if the enemy can't quite manage to wipe the squad of them with their 4+ save and their 5+ invulnerable, they might just not be able to take that objective that you're on. In support of these, and bearing the Hunter cohort traits, are the Skitarii Marshals, just 35 points, so really quite a cheap HQ here, that they don't really add all that much damage of their own. They do make their Skitarii troops a lot more dangerous, allowing you to re-roll the hit roll, making their damage output go from kind of weak to kind of alright, plus could potentially allow you to double up on stratagems if you needed to. I guess in Hunter cohort that could be relevant for having multiple units hide from enemy shooting if you needed to, and they do have some other good ones, though you might be a bit more tempted to use them on other targets perhaps. Finally, for our 5th and final list, we've got another Hunter cohort one, this one by Alexander Engelsos, going 4 wins and 1 draw at Exterminatus 8 GT, and giving us yet another variation of the Hunter cohort list with some different units. Definitely a lot of the same staples here, but this one was brave enough to take absolutely 0 Kataphron breaches, and instead it's at least somewhat hardy Skitarii with a bunch of transports. Looks like a list that might struggle to bring down the absolute hardest targets in the enemy army, that should deal with lighter infantry stuff really quite well, and looks like it's just absolutely amazing at scoring objectives with this many bodies, plenty of them moving fast, and lots of access to the Hunter cohort tricks. Similar to one of the previous armies, there's 3 Skitarii Marshals here, with the Infiltrator, Veiled Hunter, and Battlesphere uplink one, and they're leading a nice clockwork force of 70 Skitarii Vanguard or Rangers into battle, 40 of those looking like they'll be jumping out of Scorpius Duneriders, so that'll be 4 rerolls to hit and wound with those units when they get out. That's going to be at least some threat. Otherwise, again, it's really big on the Pteraxii for this one. 3 units of 10 Pteraxii Sterilizers with all those phosphor torches. Pretty massive infantry killing potential and overwatch there. Great targets for the stratagems and fast-moving deep strikers, all good things. 2 units of 5 Skystalkers for the fast-moving jump shoot jump things. Lots of midfield board control with 3 units of Cerberus Raiders and 1 unit of 5 Infiltrators. A Decalatus Assassin to go bouncing around the board, claiming secondary objectives while also debuffing an enemy stratagem. And kind of interestingly here, there's Lord Inquisitor Kyria Draxus. I kind of wonder if she's going to be joining one of the units that's jumping out of the last of the Duneriders. She does seem pretty fun for 75 points out of that. 10 AP 0 damage 2 shots that get the benefits of the reroll wound rolls from the Dunerider, a +1 to hit for a unit against Xenos units, a little bit of melee, and also a Psychic Veil sort of special rule that stops you being shot from greater than 18 inches away. I guess theoretically with the Marshal and the Hunter cohort stratagem you could have a lot of these units not being able to be targeted at certain distances. That could be really annoying for any sort of enemy gun line trying to take down a nuisance horde style army while it's trying to take objectives. Overall, I'm sure this one takes a lot of skill to play, but really quite cool to see admech functional without the use of Kataphron breaches. Finally, and given that mechanized Skitarii does seem to be a thing, the Scorpius Dunerider is here and this is 80 points. Definitely felt like one of the biggest winners out of the admech codex update. I think for 80 points it's just all around strong. 11 wounds at toughness 9 with a 12-inch move is nice and fast and fairly tough for that cost. And then it can spit out 18 shots at 18-inch range or sustained hits 1 with those stubbers, and it gets to reroll the wound rolls with those now they're twin linked, and it gives a big damage boost to the unit when it gets out if they fire at the same thing. Rerolling wound rolls with Skitarii Rangers and Vanguard actually makes their damage output alright with those special weapons, particularly if combined with a Skitarii Marshal maybe. In any case, interesting to have a look at a few of these armies and what people are choosing to run in the strongest lists around right now. Definitely still feels like an army that's got some big winners and losers. Breachers definitely feel overrepresented compared with any other mainline damage dealers out there. But pretty interesting to see what people are making out of the new detachments, particularly the Hunter cohort just going mad for the Pteraxii sterilizers I thought was fun. Let me know your thoughts on the admech army and what sort of things you've been putting on the table since the codex came out. As always, feel free to let me know any other insights to these army lists. If there's anything that I've got too badly wrong here, I'll try and post a pinned correction. Obviously, it wasn't myself who made or ran these, so I'm sure I'm going to be missing things and making some mistakes. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and that's the main way that I can keep these videos coming quite so regularly, with new ones out just about every day. If you have been enjoying a lot and want to help keep these coming, any support is enormously appreciated. It's linked down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.